We are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about some very big changes that are going to be happening with watches and the watch industry in the coming year 2020. But first, I'd like to thank you so much for coming back. Once again, do not forget to like, subscribe, and hit that thumbs up button. It seems like every day YouTube is changing up the algorithm, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But nonetheless, I really enjoy talking with you in the comments below and creating content where we can engage with each other. So anything we can do to help each other, because I really love doing this for you. And of course, some very cool things we just got in at delraywatch.com, where you cannot find what's on my wrist today. For once, is my own Rolex 16550 Transitional Explorer that I have on one of these prototype straps, which was a project we were working on. But of course, we have not come out with our own strap brand. So maybe we'll have that on the market in 2020 for you. I don't know. Leave your comments below if you're into different strap brands and things like that. So what's going on with the watch industry? Well, as we see, it's extremely difficult to get a Rolex sports model, a Patek Philippe sports model, but many watches are out there at huge discounts, 30-40% from gray market dealers, which means they're still making some on their end. You can go, you Google, pre-owned or even brand new Panerai, you're going to find gray market dealers selling them 40-50% off a lot of times. And that's a big problem for many brands out there currently, and once upon a time, all brands, right? It wasn't always that Rolex was selling at premiums over retail, and it wasn't always that there was these long waiting lines. And sure, we could say that Rolex did a pretty good job at either increasing the demand so much that people can't get the watches that they want, which, protects their brand and image, or we could just say, it just is a byproduct of where the industry is going. But what we see here is we have a problem that Rolex and Patek Philippe, out of all the other brands, have already managed to solve for themselves, at least in the short and near term in recent times. But all the other brands and holding companies are tackling it in a little bit different of a way. And what we have is a huge divide in the watch industry between the manufacturers or the holding companies that own these manufacturers in the way that they're treating their business and the way that they're tackling this problem of not being able to control the prices of their wristwatches, both new and in the pre-owned market. And so what I did recently is I went to all of the holding companies that own these brands, right? They're publicly traded somewhere in the world. We have Richemont, LVMH, Swatch Group, and of course, Rolex and Patek Philippe don't have this information available, but they've already done things out in the market. So when looking at the Richemont, LVMH, and Swatch Group investor reports, they give a lot of information because where they are registered out of and where they're traded out of, they just require so much of that. And also these are very huge companies, very intricate companies with many things that they're holding. And so they want to make sure that their largest investors really know what they're doing. But you can find some very interesting bits of information to foreshadow what's going to happen in the industry and also model the types of watches we're buying today, even as collectors, because of where the industry is going to be going. And I'll tell you right now, we'll talk about it at the end, but the prices that you'll be able to buy the watches at in the year 2020, probably near the end of 2020 into the future, are going to be much closer to the retail price than ever before. I think the days of getting 40-50% off on a watch like a Panerai or anything from Swatch Group like an Omega is going to be extremely difficult, and I'm going to tell you why, brand house by brand house. So first, let's start with Richemont. Richemont has Cartier, IWC, JLC, Dubuis, and Vacheron. Now, Richemont is probably the holding company that has the biggest issue with pricing. You go out there, you can see these huge discounts, especially from brands like Panerai. Now, when talking about this, and you look into the investors' relations report for Richemont, you can see that they talk a whole lot about e-commerce as well as their boutiques. They have no problem admitting, probably because they have to, but it's also verbatim, clear, and blunt put that their wholesale distribution, which is their authorized dealers, the sales have gone down substantially this past year. And when you look at their financial reportings for their e-commerce, they have gone up a lot, as well as financial distributions that they've made from some of their accounts in the form of investments have gone into that e-commerce category. So you can see Richemont is really trying to develop their own channels more than their authorized dealers. When you pair that with some recent news releases of them closing some ADs, including a very large authorized dealer, it really goes to show very clearly that Richemont is focusing on their own boutiques as well as their own e-commerce places that you can purchase the watches. And what that means is they can control the price. You know, if us watch geeks want 40% off on a watch, it's probably going to be extremely difficult to do it because Richemont was losing on those watch sales. They weren't making money on those watch sales. They were getting pushed out back doors. Now, going into the future, if they can control this, they invest in this, they start closing down authorized dealers, it's going to be extremely difficult to get a discount unless they absolutely have to. But walk into a boutique, it's very difficult, and it's a much different story than walking into an authorized dealer. Now, we have to look at LVMH. LVMH is Tag Heuer, Zenith, and Hublot. Now, LVMH is a little bit different. They've only got a couple of watch brands, so they're a little bit different than Swatch Group or Richemont. They have a lot of other luxury brands, but I would still consider Zenith to be a very prestigious brand considering the heritage and the history. Sure, Hublot is a little bit debatable in recent times because they've lost popularity, but when we look at a recent comment that Jean-Claude Bivet made about the brand, or actually the whole watch industry in general, he says, "We have been working for 10 years to get to the point where there are waiting lists in the watch industry." So he's very comfortable with waiting lists in the watch industry. Further, the interview goes on, and you can find the interview. There's a website called Watch Pro, but essentially he says that he is completely okay with a 2 to 3 year waiting list, a proper list for any watches. And Jean-Claude Bivet recently resigned from his position as CEO of the watch group inside LVMH, and what that shows us is I think that he probably resigned because he has a differing opinion than the rest of the industry. Later we'll talk about Rolex and how Rolex has these waiting lists, and I think that Jean-Claude Bivet, likely for the LVMH group, wanted there to be waiting lists, but instead they're going to be tackling it a little bit different of a way when they talk about in their investor reports that their online sales are going up, their wholesale is going down, which is mean less sales to ADs, less authorized dealer selling, more of their own channel, more of omni-channel, and they're creating more boutiques. So considering that Jean-Claude Bivet for LVMH, he wants there to be waiting lines and waiting lists for these watches, but the actions show much differently what they're doing. On a side note, I probably think that had a lot to do with him stepping down. Sure, he's much older in age, but also when you consider this huge divide in the watch industry, even at the own holding company, one particular company, you can see the divide happening there as well. So you have the old school versus the new school, Patek and Rolex being the old school. We'll talk about that in a bit. Next, we have to talk about Swatch because they say some very interesting things in their investor relations reports. In their own words, they say that they took uncompromising action against gray market dealers, especially in Europe, Middle East, Eastern Europe, South America, and it was at the expense of short-term negative impact on sales. In the first half of the year in triple-digit millions. In the long term, this will lead to positive effects, especially in the major markets. What does this mean for us as watch collectors? This means that going to these online third-party websites that sell brand new watches at discounts, sometimes without warranty cards, they are absolutely trying to close up these channels. It looks like they've begun doing this in other countries, US probably being the last market, but they're coming after these places and they're shutting down those pipelines. When you consider that they also say verbatim in their investor documents that their e-commerce sales are going up, as well as their investments into those online e-commerce platforms, and you pair that with the ability to be able to buy watches from them currently like Omega, which is probably one of their most popular brands, on the website directly from them at retail price, just along the same lines of Richemont and LVMH, we're going to see those prices that we can buy these watches at out on the market, if we hunt around, be closer and closer tied to that retail price. I'm not saying the retail price is going to go up, but the brands will have that ability because there will be very little watches floating out around there at such huge price disparities. And lastly, we have to talk about the other side of the divide, and this is Rolex, definitely Rolex, and Patek Philippe. Now, as watch geeks, we all know a lot of their models are very difficult to obtain, and this could be by design. Sure, it could just be the demand so high and it was just a byproduct of the buzz for it, all of the celebrities wearing these watches. But even setting all of that aside, putting that argument aside, Rolex and Patek Philippe weren't always that popular. Patek Philippe used to be just kind of considered a more classic and more old man's watch. Now you have very young guys wearing their sports watches, and the same could be said about Rolex. And so considering that they have these waiting lines and they're not even keeping up with the demand for a lot of their models, they really have already solved that problem. But when you consider a brand like Rolex, a manufacturer like Rolex, releasing a recent ad, which there'll be a picture here, they are releasing this ad to authorized dealers, and they are encouraging the authorized dealers to circulate this ad, put it on billboards, put it on websites. And what it shows is that, in the words here, the brand is so committed to their authorized dealers and not selling the watches online or to the gray market that they want not only the authorized dealers to know, they want the consumers to know. When you look at the wording here, this screams that Rolex does not want their watches circulating around, and they want to control the pricing a little bit different. It looks like they want to control it by not increasing the supply or oversupplying the watches, but instead kind of create these lines and these channels through their boutiques and let the boutiques decide, or their authorized dealers decide. It's kind of interesting to see this huge divide and an issue that did exist with pricing across the board, but Rolex and Patek Philippe managed to solve this a little bit different of a way than the other brands and holding companies are trying to tackle it. But what do you guys think? Do you think that, holding companies like Richemont, LVMH, and Swatch Group are going to be able to transition to this model where there's very few ADs, they own their own channels of distribution? Do you think they're going to be able to successfully do that? And also, are you really willing to pay full retail all of the time? I know many of you guys out there, even myself included, like a good deal in the wristwatch community. That's why we have a business like Del Rey Watch, where we can help you guys find the watch that you want at a better price. And there's many other people that do this as well. But what do you guys think? Is this something that's going to anger you? I know many of you will kind of feel like it's price fixing based on comments I've seen on other videos in the past. So what do you guys think? Leave in the comments below. Do not forget to like and subscribe, thumbs up. I do appreciate it. And you can find me on Instagram, The Real John P. Thanks, guys. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.